12-year-old girl gave birth to alien-looking baby. How did this happen? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Clara had always been an unassuming girl. Quiet, studious, and small for her age. She spent most of her time reading or drawing in the corner of her bedroom. At 12 years old, she was still a child in many ways, her biggest concerns revolving around schoolwork and whether her single mother, Anna, would make her favorite spaghetti for dinner. Life in their small town was slow and predictable until the day Clara collapsed during school recess. It started with a strange dizziness. Clara had been standing near the edge of the playground, watching her classmates play kickball, when the world around her began to tilt. She pressed a hand to her stomach, wincing at an unfamiliar pain that felt sharp yet distant, like it wasn't entirely her own. Before she could cry out, her legs gave way, and she crumpled to the ground. The school nurse called Anna in a panic, her voice trembling as she described Clara's condition. "She's unconscious, and her pulse is erratic. You need to get her to the hospital right away." By the time Anna arrived, Clara had regained consciousness but was pale and visibly shaking. Anna wrapped her arms around her daughter, fear clawing at her chest. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Did you fall? Did you hit your head?" Clara shook her head weakly. "No, my stomach hurts so bad." Anna rushed her to the nearest hospital, her heart pounding as she sped through the quiet streets. Clara whimpered softly in the passenger seat, clutching her stomach, and Anna couldn't help but glance at her every few seconds, searching for answers in her pale, sweat-drenched face. When they arrived at the hospital, the ER staff sprang into action. Clara was wheeled into an examination room while Anna filled out paperwork, her hands trembling as she scribbled down Clara's information. A nurse took her blood pressure, while a doctor palpated her abdomen and asked a flurry of questions. "Has she been sick recently? Any fevers? Vomiting?" Anna shook her head. "Nothing out of the ordinary. She's always been healthy." The doctor frowned, his gloved hands pressing gently against Clara's stomach. "Her abdomen is unusually firm. We'll need to run some tests." What happened next blurred together in Anna's mind. The ultrasound machine wheeled into the room, the faint sound of murmurs as the technician examined the screen, and then the doctor's stunned expression as he turned to Anna. "Ms. Adams," he began cautiously, his voice low, "this might sound impossible, but your daughter appears to be in labor." The words hit Anna like a physical blow. She blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "She's in active labor," the doctor repeated. "There's a fetus. We need to deliver it immediately." Anna stumbled back, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible. She's 12. She's never. This has to be a mistake." The doctor placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "I understand this is shocking, but there's no time to waste. Her body is under immense stress, and the baby needs to come out now." Anna felt the room spin around her as she tried to process the impossible. Meanwhile, Clara lay on the bed, her breathing ragged. "Mom," she whimpered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What's happening to me?" Anna forced herself to take a deep breath and knelt beside her daughter. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart. I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you." Within minutes, Clara was prepped for delivery. A team of nurses and doctors surrounded her, their faces a mixture of professionalism and disbelief. Anna held Clara's hand tightly, whispering reassurances even as her own mind raced with questions. The delivery was quick but excruciating. Clara cried out in pain, her small frame trembling with the effort. Anna's heart broke as she watched her daughter endure something no 12-year-old should ever have to face. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. A sharp, piercing cry filled the room. But it wasn't the cry of a normal baby. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at the newborn. One of the nurses, holding the baby in a blanket, froze mid-step, her face pale. "Doctor, you need to see this." The doctor stepped forward, and even he couldn't hide his shock. The baby was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its skin was pale and translucent, with veins visible beneath the surface. Its eyes were large and dark, taking up most of its small, oval-shaped face. Its limbs were long and thin, ending in delicate, almost claw-like fingers. "What is that?" one of the nurses whispered, her voice trembling. Anna's breath caught in her throat as she glimpsed the baby for the first time. It didn't look human, at least not entirely. But what terrified her even more was the way Clara reached out for it, her expression softening. "Give him to me," Clara said, her voice weak but insistent. The doctor hesitated, glancing at Anna for guidance. Anna didn't know what to say. She was too stunned to speak, too overwhelmed to comprehend what was happening. Finally, the doctor nodded to the nurse, who reluctantly placed the baby in Clara's arms. As soon as the baby touched her, Clara's trembling stopped. She cradled it gently, her expression a mix of fear and wonder. "It's okay," she whispered to the baby, her voice soothing. "I've got you." Anna stared at her daughter, torn between disbelief and a maternal instinct to protect her. "Clara, what's going on? How is this possible?" Clara looked up at her mother, her eyes wide and filled with tears. "I don't know, Mom, but he's mine. I can feel it." The medical staff exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do. The doctor cleared his throat, his professional demeanor slipping. "We need to run tests on both of them. This is beyond anything we've ever encountered." Anna nodded numbly, unable to tear her eyes away from the baby in Clara's arms. The child's dark eyes seemed to study its surroundings with an unsettling intelligence, its tiny chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. The tests began immediately. Blood samples were taken, ultrasounds performed, and specialists called in from neighboring hospitals. The results only deepened the mystery. The baby's DNA showed markers that were unrecognizable, with sequences that didn't match anything in the human genome. Even more baffling, Clara's own DNA showed subtle anomalies that had gone unnoticed until now. By the time the tests were complete, the hospital was swarming with government officials and scientists. Clara and the baby were moved to a secure wing, where they were closely monitored. Anna stayed by her daughter's side, refusing to leave her for even a moment. As the hours turned into days, the outside world began to take notice. News of the strange birth leaked, and reporters camped outside the hospital, clamoring for information. The small town buzzed with rumors, ranging from alien abductions to secret government experiments. Clara's classmates, once her friends, whispered cruel things about her, calling her a freak and worse. Through it all, Clara clung to her baby. She named him Luca, a name that felt right, even if she didn't know why. Despite his alien appearance, she loved him fiercely. And as the days passed, it became clear that Luca wasn't an ordinary child. "Animals have so much to teach us about love," said another. Sarah was overwhelmed by the outpouring of kindness and support. She began posting updates regularly, sharing stories of Max and Pip's adventures together. Their friendship became a source of joy not just for Sarah, but for thousands of people who followed their journey. One morning, Sarah sat on the back porch with her coffee, watching Max and Pip explore the yard. Pip was waddling happily through the grass, his feathers fluffier now, while Max trotted alongside him, his tail wagging lazily. It was a simple scene, but it filled Sarah with a profound sense of peace. "You two really are something special," she said softly, mostly to herself. Max paused and looked back at her, his eyes shining as if he understood every word. And in a way, maybe he did. As the days turned into weeks, Pip grew stronger, and his confidence blossomed. He no longer hesitated when it came to exploring new spaces or waddling up to unfamiliar objects. Max was always close by, watching with the steady patience of a guardian. It was as if Pip had adopted Max as his parent, or perhaps Max had adopted Pip as his child. Whatever the case, their bond only grew deeper with time. Sarah couldn't help but marvel at the way the two communicated. There was no spoken language between them, yet they seemed to understand each other perfectly. If Pip let out a distressed chirp, Max was immediately there, his nose nudging the duckling gently as if to ask, "What's wrong?" When Pip wandered too far into the yard, Max would walk over and herd him back, his movements slow and deliberate to avoid frightening the little bird. One morning, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, her gaze fixed on the backyard. Max and Pip were at it again. This time, Max had laid down in the grass, completely still, while Pip clambered clumsily over his back. The duckling would slip and flap his wings in protest, and Max would tilt his head ever so slightly, as if amused by the antics of his little friend. Sarah shook her head with a smile. "You're a saint, Max," she said aloud, though the golden retriever was far too focused on his self-imposed babysitting duties to acknowledge her. That afternoon, Sarah decided to share another update on Max and Pip's story. She posted a video she'd taken that morning, captioned simply, "Best friends come in all shapes and sizes." Within hours, the video had racked up thousands of views. People couldn't seem to get enough of the gentle dog and his tiny, feathered companion. Comments poured in once again. "I didn't know I needed this in my life, but now I can't stop smiling. This is the kind of content the world needs right now. I hope these two never leave each other's side." Sarah scrolled through the responses, overwhelmed by the positivity radiating from complete strangers. It amazed her how something so simple, just a dog and a duckling, could touch so many lives. But then again, she thought, maybe it wasn't so simple after all. Maybe it was the kind of story people needed. A reminder that kindness and connection could exist even in the most unexpected places. As the weeks stretched into months, Pip grew larger and stronger, his yellow fluff gradually giving way to sleek feathers of white and brown. He was no longer the tiny, helpless creature Sarah had found in the grass that day, but he still followed Max wherever he went. The bond they had formed in those early days seemed unbreakable. One afternoon, Sarah decided to take Max and Pip for a walk together. She had fashioned a makeshift harness for Pip to keep him safe, though he protested with indignant little quacks as she fitted it around his small body. Max, of course, waited patiently by the door, his tail wagging as Sarah clipped on his leash. "Already?" she asked, opening the door. Pip waddled out first, his tiny feet tapping against the pavement, while Max trotted dutifully behind. They made quite the pair, Max with his golden coat and calm demeanor, and Pip with his determined little strut. People they passed on the sidewalk stopped and stared, their faces lighting up with smiles as they watched the duo walk side by side. "Is that a duck?" one woman exclaimed, stopping in her tracks. "And he's walking with your dog?" Sarah laughed. "Yes, this is Pip, and that's Max. They're inseparable." A group of children ran up, their eyes wide with curiosity. "Can we pet them?" one of them asked, already crouching down to get a better look. Max, ever the gentle giant, sat obediently while the children scratched behind his ears. Pip, on the other hand, seemed a little unsure about all the attention. He waddled closer to Max, as though seeking reassurance. Max lowered his head and gave Pip a gentle nudge, as if to say, "It's okay. I'm here." The sight melted Sarah's heart. "You're his hero, Max," she murmured as they continued their walk, the children waving goodbye behind them. Over time, Pip's presence became a regular part of Sarah's routine. Every morning, he would wait by the back door, quacking softly until Sarah let him out to join Max in the yard. The two of them would explore together, Pip waddling confidently through the grass, Max always close behind. But Sarah couldn't ignore the changes happening with Pip. He was growing up quickly, and it was becoming clear that he was no longer just a pet. He was a duck, after all, and Sarah knew that his instincts would eventually lead him to water and to others of his kind. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Sarah sat on the back porch, watching Max and Pip together. Pip had taken to splashing in the kiddie pool Sarah had set up, his webbed feet paddling enthusiastically as he flapped his wings. Max lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, his eyes never straying far from the duckling. Sarah sighed softly, a mix of pride and sadness filling her heart. "You two have been quite the pair, haven't you?" she said, though neither of them seemed to hear her. She knew the time was coming when she would have to make a decision. Pip deserved to be with other ducks, to live the life he was meant to live. But the thought of separating him from Max, of breaking the bond they had built, was almost too much to bear. Later that night, as Sarah sat in bed scrolling through photos of Max and Pip on her phone, she came across one of the very first pictures she had taken. Pip nestled in Max's fur, his tiny body barely visible against the golden retriever's side. Tears pricked her eyes as she realized just how far they had come. The duckling she had found so small and vulnerable had grown into a healthy, confident bird, all because of Max. The next morning, Sarah made a call to a local wildlife sanctuary that specialized in waterfowl. She explained Pip's story to the kind woman on the other end of the line, who listened with interest and compassion. "It sounds like you've done an incredible job with him," the woman said. "We'd be happy to give him a home here. He'll have plenty of space to swim and other ducks to keep him company." Sarah thanked her and hung up, the weight of the decision settling heavily on her shoulders. She knew it was the right thing to do for Pip, but that didn't make it any easier. When Sarah opened the back door to let Max and Pip out, Max seemed to sense that something was different. He hesitated for a moment, his dark eyes fixed on Sarah's face as if to ask, "What's wrong?" "It's okay, Max," Sarah said softly, kneeling to scratch behind his ears. "Everything's going to be okay." She watched as Pip waddled happily into the yard, oblivious to the changes that lay ahead. Max followed close behind, his tail swishing slowly, his presence as steady and comforting as ever. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. "You've done so much for him, Max," she whispered. "Now it's my turn to do what's best." The day Sarah had dreaded finally arrived. The morning air felt heavy with anticipation, and even the usual chirping of birds seemed quieter. Sarah stood in the kitchen, watching Pip and Max through the window as they played in the yard. Max was lying in the grass, his tail wagging slowly, while Pip waddled around him in excited little circles, occasionally pecking playfully at the dog's fur. Sarah clutched her coffee mug, the warmth doing little to ease the knot in her stomach. Today was the day she would bring Pip to the wildlife sanctuary, where he could live with other ducks and be part of the natural world he belonged to. It was the right thing to do, but as she watched the pair outside, it didn't feel fair. Not to Pip, not to Max, and certainly not to her. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped out onto the porch. "Max, Pip," she called gently. Max lifted his head, his ears perking up, while Pip let out a soft quack and waddled toward her, his feathers gleaming in the sunlight. "Come on, guys," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "We're going for a little trip." Pip waddled over to her eagerly, completely unaware of what lay ahead. Max trotted up behind him, his dark eyes scanning Sarah's face as though trying to read her emotions. He seemed to sense that something was off. His tail wagged, but slower than usual, and his steps were more cautious. Inside, Sarah prepared a small carrier for Pip. She placed a soft towel at the bottom and left the door open, crouching down to gently scoop up the duckling. Pip let out a little protest quack but quickly settled into her hands, his trust in her unwavering. Max sat nearby, watching closely. When Sarah placed Pip in the carrier, Max let out a low whine and stepped forward, his nose brushing against the carrier's door. Pip chirped softly in response, their silent communication tugging at Sarah's heart. "I know, Max," she said softly, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. "I know this is hard, but he'll be happy there. He'll have other ducks to play with and a big pond to swim in. It's where he's meant to be." Max sat back, his head lowered slightly, as though he understood but didn't agree. The drive to the sanctuary was quiet. Sarah kept glancing at the rearview mirror, where Pip's carrier sat in the back seat. Max lay beside it, his head resting near the carrier door as though to reassure Pip that he was still there. Pip, for his part, chirped quietly now and then, the sounds soft and sad in the otherwise still car. The wildlife sanctuary was nestled on the outskirts of town, surrounded by open fields and a large, shimmering pond that stretched across the property. Ducks, geese, and other waterfowl dotted the landscape, gliding across the water or resting in the shade of nearby trees. It was beautiful, peaceful, and everything Pip needed. A woman named Carla greeted Sarah at the entrance, her warm smile putting her at ease. "You must be Sarah," she said kindly, glancing at the golden retriever who stood protectively near the carrier. "And this must be Pip, and Max, of course." Sarah nodded, giving Max's leash a gentle tug as she led him forward. Max stayed close to the carrier, his nose brushing against it now and then as if to check on Pip. Carla crouched down to look at Pip through the carrier's mesh door. "Well, aren't you a sweet little thing?" she cooed. "Don't worry, Pip. You're going to love it here." Sarah smiled weakly, though her throat felt tight. "Thank you for taking him. He's very special to us." Carla nodded knowingly. "It's never easy, is it?" she said. "But you're doing the right thing. He'll have a good life here. Lots of space to roam, friends to swim with, and plenty of love." Sarah opened the carrier door, and Pip stepped out cautiously. He blinked up at the bright sky before taking a few tentative steps onto the grass. Max immediately moved closer, his nose nudging Pip gently as if to encourage him. Pip let out a tiny quack in response, his confidence growing as he began to explore. Carla led them toward the pond, where a group of ducks swam lazily in the water. Pip's chirps grew louder and more excited as he caught sight of the other ducks. He waddled faster, his little feet pattering across the grass. Sarah knelt down beside Max, her hand resting on his back as they watched Pip approach the water. "Look at him, Max," she said softly. "He's happy. This is where he's supposed to be." Max didn't move. His dark eyes remained fixed on Pip as the little duckling reached the edge of the pond. For a moment, Pip hesitated, glancing back at Max and Sarah one last time. Then, with a determined flap of his wings, he slid into the water, his tiny body gliding smoothly across the surface. The other ducks took notice, a few of them swimming over to greet the newcomer. Pip let out an enthusiastic quack, and within moments, he was paddling alongside them, his little wings flapping with joy. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she watched. It was a beautiful sight, but also a bittersweet one. Beside her, Max let out a soft whine, his head tilting slightly as he watched Pip disappear into the group of ducks. "He's okay, Max," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "You did such a good job taking care of him. He's safe now." Max stayed still for a long moment before finally lying down on the grass, his head resting on his paws as he continued to watch Pip. Sarah stayed with him, the two of them sitting in silence as the sun rose higher in the sky. The drive home felt emptier without Pip. Max sat quietly in the back seat, his head resting where the carrier had been, his dark eyes reflecting a quiet sadness that mirrored Sarah's own. She reached back to scratch his ears gently. "I know, buddy," she said softly. "It's hard, but we did the right thing." When they got home, Max immediately went to the back door, waiting for Sarah to let him into the yard. She opened the door, and Max stepped outside, his eyes scanning the grass as if searching for Pip. Sarah watched him from the kitchen window, her heart aching as Max wandered to the kiddie pool where Pip had once splashed so happily. He sniffed at the water, then lay down beside it, his head resting on his paws. That night, Max slept at the foot of Sarah's bed as usual, but he seemed quieter than before. Sarah lay awake, the silence of the house feeling heavier without Pip's tiny peeps echoing through it. She missed him too, though she took comfort in knowing he was where he belonged. Over the next few days, Max slowly began to adjust. He still wandered to the backyard every morning, as if expecting Pip to waddle out from behind a bush. But as time passed, he spent more time napping in the sun or playing with his toys, his spirit gradually returning to normal. One afternoon, about a month later, Sarah received a call from Carla at the wildlife sanctuary. "I just wanted to give you an update on Pip," she said warmly. "He's doing so well here. He's made friends with the other ducks, and he's thriving in the pond. He's even started leading the younger ducklings around. It's like he's taken on the role of protector." Sarah laughed softly, a lump forming in her throat. "That sounds just like him. And I thought you'd want to know," Carla added, "that every morning, Pip swims to the edge of the pond and sits there for a while, looking out toward the trees. We think he's remembering you and Mac." Sarah smiled, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you for telling me. That means so much." When she hung up, she knelt down beside Max, scratching gently behind his ears. "Did you hear that, buddy? Pip's doing great. He hasn't forgotten us." Max looked up at her with his warm, soulful eyes, as if he understood every word. Sarah smiled through her tears, pulling him into a hug. "You were the best friend he could have ever asked for, Max. And I think he'll always remember you." In the weeks that followed, life at home settled into a new rhythm. Sarah still felt Pip's absence in the quiet moments, when she looked out at the backyard and didn't see the little duckling waddling after Max, or when she heard the faint sound of the kiddie pool being rocked by the wind. And Max, though he seemed to have accepted Pip's departure, still spent mornings sitting by the back porch as if waiting for something or someone. One evening, Sarah sat on the couch with Max curled up beside her. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Sarah scrolled through her phone, looking at the dozens of photos and videos she had taken of Max and Pip over the past few months. Each one brought back memories: Pip splashing in the kiddie pool while Max watched patiently, the duckling perched on Max's back during their lazy afternoons in the sun, the quiet moments when Pip would nestle into Max's fur for comfort. Unable to help herself, Sarah posted a video of Max and Pip to her social media, captioning it, "Some friendships never fade, no matter the distance." Within minutes, the post began gaining traction, and Sarah found herself reading through the comments as they poured in. "I can't stop crying. What a beautiful story. This is the kind of love the world needs more of. Any chance of an update on Pip? We all miss him too." The last comment made Sarah pause. It wasn't just her and Max who missed Pip. It was thousands of people who had followed their journey. The bond between the dog and the duckling had touched hearts far beyond their small home, reminding people of the beauty of connection and loyalty. The following weekend, Sarah decided it was time for a visit to the wildlife sanctuary. She called Carla to confirm that it was okay to stop by, and Carla's excitement was palpable over the phone. "Oh, Pip is going to be so happy to see you both," she said. "He's grown so much, but I think he still remembers his roots. Come by any time." When Sarah told Max about the trip, his ears perked up at the mention of Pip's name, and he ran to the back door, tail wagging eagerly. Sarah chuckled, kneeling beside him to ruffle his fur. "You're still his protector, huh? Let's go see our little friend." The drive to the sanctuary felt lighter this time. Max sat up in the back seat, his head near the window, watching the world rush by with eager anticipation. Sarah couldn't help but smile at his excitement. It was as if he knew exactly where they were going. When they arrived, Carla was waiting for them near the entrance. She smiled warmly as Max bounded out of the car, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. "He looks ready," she said with a laugh, leading them toward the large pond that stretched across the sanctuary's center. The area was alive with activity. Ducks and geese floated peacefully across the water, dipping their heads beneath the surface or waddling along the shore. Carla motioned toward a small group of ducks gathered near a cluster of reeds. "That's Pip," she said softly. "He's the one leading the others." Sarah's breath caught as she saw him. Pip was no longer the tiny, fragile duckling they had brought home. He had grown into a strong, confident duck with sleek feathers and an unmistakable air of pride. Yet despite his growth, there was something familiar about him. The way he stood tall, the way his head tilted as he looked around, as if searching for something. Max seemed to sense it too. He stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the group of ducks. Then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, Pip turned his head and saw them. For a moment, there was nothing but stillness. Pip frozen by the water's edge, Max standing motionless beside Sarah. Then Pip let out a loud, joyful quack and waddled forward, his little feet moving quickly across the grass. Max took off as well, trotting toward him with his tail wagging wildly. When they met, Pip flapped his wings excitedly, quacking up a storm as Max lowered his head to nudge the duck affectionately with his nose. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she watched them reunite. It was as if no time had passed at all. Pip waddled in circles around Max, pecking at his fur playfully, while Max lay down on the grass, his tail thumping with happiness. The bond they shared was undeniable, and it filled the air with a kind of magic that Sarah couldn't quite explain. "He still remembers," Carla said softly, standing beside Sarah. "I've never seen anything like it." Sarah wiped at her eyes with a laugh. "Neither have I. For the rest of the afternoon, Max and Pip were inseparable. They explored the edge of the pond together, with Pip occasionally hopping into the water and then swimming back to where Max waited patiently on the shore. Other ducks came and went, but Pip stayed close to Max, as though he wanted to make the most of every moment. Sarah sat on the grass nearby, her heart full as she watched them. It amazed her how natural their connection was, despite the differences between them. It wasn't something that could be explained or analyzed. It simply was. Before they left, Sarah sat by the pond with Max beside her. Pip waddled over, his feathers shimmering in the golden light of the setting sun. Sarah smiled and reached out to stroke his back gently. "You've grown up so much, Pip," she whispered. "We're so proud of you." Pip let out a soft quack, his head tilting toward her before he turned to nuzzle Max one last time. It was as if he knew they had to say goodbye again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't a farewell filled with sadness or uncertainty. It was a goodbye with love, with gratitude, and with the knowledge that their bond would always remain, no matter where life took them. As Sarah and Max walked back to the car, Pip stood by the water's edge, watching them go. Sarah turned back one last time, her heart swelling as she saw the little duck still standing tall, as though saying, "Thank you." Max let out a soft huff, his gaze lingering on Pip before he turned to follow Sarah. This time, his steps were lighter, his tail wagging slowly as they climbed into the car. That night, as Sarah sat on the couch with Max curled up beside her, she thought about everything they had been through. The unexpected arrival of a tiny, helpless duckling had brought so much joy, so many lessons, and a kind of love that was pure and rare. Max had shown her what it meant to care unconditionally, to protect without hesitation, and to let go when the time was right. She picked up her phone and scrolled through the photos from that day, stopping on one of Max and Pip by the pond, their bond as clear as ever. She smiled and posted the photo with a simple caption. "Some friendships never end, they just change. Max and Pip, forever friends." The response was immediate, with comments flooding in from people around the world who had followed their journey. "This made me cry happy tears. Love like this is so special. Thank you for sharing it with us. True friendship knows no boundaries. Just love." Sarah set her phone down and leaned back, running her hand through Max's fur, as he let out a soft sigh of contentment. "We did good, didn't we, buddy?" she said softly. "We helped him when he needed us. And now he's happy." Max's tail thumped gently against the couch, as if agreeing with her. Outside, the night was calm, the stars shimmering above their quiet little home. And though Pip was far away, Sarah knew his presence would always be with them. A reminder that love, in all its forms, could change the world. That evening, after Sarah had shared the photo of Max and Pip at the sanctuary, she sat quietly on the back porch, sipping tea as the last of the sunlight faded from the sky. Max lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, his deep, steady breaths filling the silence. The backyard felt empty without Pip waddling across it or splashing in the kiddie pool. But there was a sense of peace too, a feeling that everything had turned out exactly as it was meant to. Sarah stared at the sky, its warm orange glow gradually giving way to soft purples and blues. She let her mind drift back to that first day, the day they had found Pip in the tall grass, so small, so fragile, and so alone. It was hard to believe how much had changed since then. What started as an unexpected encounter had grown into something extraordinary, a bond that had touched not only their lives but the lives of countless people around the world. Max let out a small sigh, as if echoing her thoughts. Sarah looked down at him and smiled softly. "You really are one of a kind. You know that?" she said, reaching down to ruffle the fur between his ears. Max's tail thumped lazily against the wooden porch in response, but his gaze remained fixed on the empty backyard. "I think you miss him as much as I do," Sarah murmured. She set her mug aside and leaned back in her chair, watching as the first stars began to appear. "But we did the right thing. He's where he's supposed to be, with his own kind." Max lifted his head slightly, his ears twitching at the faint sound of crickets in the distance. Sarah chuckled softly. "You'll see him again, you know. Maybe not here, but somewhere. I believe that And in a way, she did. Sarah liked to think that bonds like the one Max and Pip shared didn't just disappear. They lingered, stretching across time and distance like an invisible thread. Over the next few days, Sarah noticed little reminders of Pip everywhere. The kiddie pool in the backyard, now still and empty, caught her eye every time she stepped outside. The patches of grass where Pip had waddled so many times had been flattened by his tiny feet, leaving faint paths that seemed to lead to nowhere. Max still visited those spots, his nose to the ground as though searching for his little friend. Sarah tried to distract him with toys and treats, but Max always ended up lying in his favorite spot near the back door, his gaze fixed on the yard. One afternoon, Sarah sat on the porch, scrolling through messages she had received from people who had followed Max and Pip's story. Strangers from all over the world had sent her kind words, sharing how the bond between the dog and the duckling had brought them joy, comfort, and even hope during difficult times. One message stood out in particular. It was from a woman named Claire, who wrote, "I lost my husband a year ago, and I've struggled every day since. Your posts about Max and Pip reminded me that love never really leaves us. It just changes. Thank you for sharing their story. It's given me something beautiful to hold on to." Sarah's throat tightened as she read the words. She had never imagined that something as simple as Max and Pip's friendship could have such a profound impact on others. It reminded her that love, in all its forms, had a way of connecting people, of healing wounds, and of bringing light into the darkest corners of life. She looked up from her phone to see Max staring at her, his head tilted slightly, as though he could sense the emotions swirling in her chest. "You're a hero, Max," Sarah said softly, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. "You and Pip. You've done so much more than I ever could have imagined." Max gave her a gentle nudge, his warm eyes filled with a quiet understanding. A few weeks later, Sarah received an unexpected call from Carla at the wildlife sanctuary. "I thought you might like an update on Pip," Carla said cheerfully. "He's doing wonderfully here. He's become a bit of a leader, actually, always the first to explore new areas of the pond and the first to greet us when we bring food. It's like he's looking out for the others." Sarah's heart swelled with pride. "That sounds just like him," she said with a smile. Carla hesitated for a moment before adding, "There's something else I thought you'd want to know. Every morning, Pip still swims to the edge of the pond and sits there, staring out at the trees. It's like he's waiting for something, or someone." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Does he really?" "He does," Carla replied softly. "I think he remembers you, and Max animals don't forget love, you know." When the call ended, Sarah found Max lying on his bed in the living room. She knelt beside him, running her fingers gently through his golden fur. "Did you hear that, buddy?" she whispered. "Pip still remembers us. He hasn't forgotten." Max lifted his head, his tail swishing faintly as he gazed at her with those kind, knowing eyes. It was as if he understood everything she was saying, as if he too carried Pip's memory in his heart. That evening, Sarah decided to take Max for a walk down the same trail where they had first found Pip. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the grass and trees. Max trotted ahead, his tail wagging as he explored familiar scents and sounds. Sarah followed slowly, her mind drifting back to that first morning. The sound of Pip's tiny peeps, the sight of Max lying protectively beside him, and the quiet certainty that they were meant to find each other. It had all seemed so random at the time, but now she believed it had happened for a reason. When they reached the patch of grass where Pip had first been found, Max stopped and turned to look at Sarah, his tail wagging gently. Sarah smiled, kneeling down beside him. "This is where it all began, isn't it?" she said softly. Max sat down beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon as the sun began to dip lower. For a moment, it felt as though Pip were there with them, his soft chirps echoing in the wind, his tiny feet pattering across the grass. Sarah closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her. The months they had spent with Pip had been unexpected, challenging, and beautiful all at once. It was a chapter in their lives that she would carry with her forever, a reminder of the love and loyalty that could exist between two souls, no matter how different they might be. She opened her eyes to see Max watching her, His head tilted slightly as if to say, "It's okay. I remember too." Sarah smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck as the sky turned to shades of purple and gold. "Come on, Max," she whispered. "Let's go home." Together, they walked back down the trail, the golden light following them like a gentle promise. Back at home, Sarah sat on the couch with Max curled up beside her, his steady breathing filling the quiet room. She scrolled through her phone once more, stopping on the photo of Max and Pip at the sanctuary. It was her favorite picture. The two of them side by side, their bond unshakable, their connection undeniable. With a soft smile, she posted the photo again, this time with a new caption. "Some friendships change us forever. Max and Pip taught me that love, no matter how small, can leave the biggest impact." The post quickly gained attention, with comments pouring in from people who had followed their story. "This story gives me hope. Thank you for sharing their friendship with us. Pip may be with his own kind now, but he'll always have a place in Max's heart, and ours too. Love like this is rare and beautiful. We need more of it in the world." As Sarah set her phone down, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. Pip may have found a new home, but his spirit remained with them, a tiny, joyful presence that had changed their lives forever. Max let out a soft sigh, nuzzling closer to Sarah as they sat together in the quiet evening light. "Good boy, Max," Sarah whispered. "You really are the best friend anyone could ask for." And somewhere out there, on a quiet pond beneath the setting sun, a duck named Pip swam to the water's edge and looked toward the trees, as though he could still feel the love that had brought him home.